Nowadays, if something happens to you, you get injured or sick or need immediate medical attention, you call an ambulance, right? You call an ambulance and you expect that ambulance to arrive quickly, and if needed, you expect to receive life-saving emergency care in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. Today, ambulances are staffed by emergency medical technicians, or EMTs, who are trained to save lives during emergencies or while en route to the hospital. They perform CPR, they use defibrillators, they control bleeding, they can give you oxygen or intubation if necessary, administer life-saving drugs like epinephrine for allergies. And in this way, many lives are saved that would otherwise be lost before ever reaching the hospital. Everyone recognizes the importance of this service, but did you know it's actually a very new thing? Did you know that our modern ambulance and emergency medical services have only been around for less than 60 years? That before that, you would have been picked up by a police or even a hearse from a local funeral home with much slower response times and no medical treatment en route. That before that, many people needlessly died on their way to the hospital, and that it was a team of Black Americans from Pittsburgh's poverty-stricken Hill District who revolutionized emergency response with their Freedom House ambulance service. You didn't know that? Let's fix that. Hello, I'm Venmo LaFountaine, and this is History Fix, where I tell surprising true stories from history you won't be able to stop thinking about. It is officially Black History Month in the United States. I love Black History Month and Women's History Month, which is next month, March, because all of the topics are just so perfect for History Fix. Black history, women's history, is lesser known history by nature, so I can pretty much pull a topic out of a hat and it works perfectly. This particular topic, the Freedom House Ambulance Service, was suggested by Janice on Instagram. So shout out to Janice. Thank you. This is such a worthy topic, and I cannot believe I didn't know about it. The Freedom House Ambulance Service completely revolutionized emergency medical response. I can't believe they weren't doing these things before it. So let's talk about that, because the Freedom House Ambulance Service came to be in 1967. But what the heck was happening before that? If you called 911 because you were having a heart attack or whatever, what would happen? Well, there weren't really ambulances like there are today. One of two things would happen. You'd either be picked up by police and sort of unceremoniously dumped into the back of a paddy wagon, which is like a police van, and driven to the hospital. Or, even worse, you'd be picked up by a hearse from a local funeral home. They had given up on you already before they even got there. Either way, the response time was not great, and you received very little life-saving services beyond basic first aid on the way to the hospital or the morgue in many cases. There was not a whole lot they could do. They were just there to drive you to the hospital, hopefully in time. Now, this kind of worked okay back in times when people died all the time anyway, I guess. And in times when people were concentrated for the most part into urban areas near a hospital. But after World War II, two things changed. First, there were way more advances in emergency medical care. In some ways, World War II was fought in the medic's tent. I talked about this a little bit in my episode about antibiotics, episode 62. Antibiotics were a game changer during World War II, saving countless lives. They started to realize, if we can actually save these guys, get them back out onto the battlefield, then we might have the manpower to actually win this war. Antibiotics were hugely helpful there, as were new vaccines, treatment for malaria that came out around that time, the development of blood banks, and new surgical techniques. And because of this focus on advanced medical care during World War II, the survival rate for a wounded soldier went up from just 4% in World War I. Only 4% of wounded soldiers survived in World War I to 50% in World War II. So that is super significant. It means the technology, the know-how now exists to save lives on and off the battlefield. Another thing happened after World War II that affected emergency medicine, but in a bad way. Many people moved out of urban centers and farther away from the hospitals. This was really the invention of the nuclear family, right? Like mom, dad, brother, sister, all in their own little house with their white picket fence. And this was a big shift in the way that Americans were living. Before that, they were living in apartments, in big cities, in multi-generational households. Now everyone sort of moves off on their own into suburbs, farther from cities and farther from hospitals. But what that meant was that the time it took for the police paddy wagon or the hearse to actually get to someone out in the suburbs and then get them back to the hospital in the city was way too long, and many people were dying before they ever got any medical care. In 1966, a paper was published by the National Academy of Sciences titled Accidental Death and Disability, the Neglected Disease of Modern Society. And this study stated that as many as 50,000 deaths each year were the direct result of inadequate ambulances and a lack of hospitals close enough to where people were living in the United States. They could not get people to the hospitals in time, and they could not help them adequately on the way. In Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, this emerging crisis really came to light when their former mayor, David L. Lawrence, who was also a former governor of Pennsylvania, had a heart attack and was transported to the hospital by police. And upon arrival, he had no brain activity. They were able to keep him alive on life support, but, they ultimately had to decide that there was nothing that they could do for him, and he died after being removed from life support. Lawrence was treated at the hospital there in Pittsburgh by a physician named Peter Safar. And Dr. Safar was outspokenly convinced that Lawrence would have survived if he had received adequate care on the way to the hospital, if someone had been working on him en route. Now, to be fair, someone was trying. There happened to be a nurse who was actually trained by Dr. Safar in the audience when Lawrence collapsed, because he collapsed during a public appearance. And she tried to do chest compressions on him on the way to the hospital, but she was bouncing around the back of this fast-moving police van, and she couldn't do it effectively. This is not an isolated incident for Dr. Safar, unfortunately. That same year, 1966, his 11-year-old daughter Elizabeth died of an asthma attack. Same situation, it took them too long to get her to the hospital. And before she reached it, she had fallen into an asthma-induced coma and suffered fatal brain damage. Once again, Dr. Safar was convinced that if she had received proper pre-hospital care, her life would have been saved. And, this is his daughter, so he's clearly very passionate about this at this point. After losing his daughter so tragically, he began focusing on advancing technology that would prevent these types of deaths from happening to other people. He helped to develop cardiopulmonary resuscitation, aka CPR. Yes, there was no CPR before the 1960s. I'm sure they were doing some sort of attempt, but the official method of CPR was developed in the 1960s. And Dr. Safar helped to develop it and sort of get the knowledge out there to the people. He's the one who trained that nurse who attempted to do CPR on the former mayor/former governor. But this problem of inadequate pre-hospital care continued, and people continued to die unnecessarily en route to the hospital. This was especially bad in predominantly Black neighborhoods like Pittsburgh's impoverished Hill District. Wait times for paddy wagons and hearses were often longer in Black neighborhoods. They took their time getting to them. They were not in a hurry. Sometimes they refused to transport Black people altogether. Mitchell Brown, who eventually became a Freedom House paramedic, recounts in an article for EMS 1 when his mother suffered a cerebral hemorrhage when he was just 17 years old. He says, quote, We called the police to come and take care of her. The two white police officers refused to carry her. They said she was drunk. I carried her myself and put her in the paddy wagon. We took her to St. Francis Hospital. I never saw her alive again." End quote. Also, many Black residents of the Hill neighborhood were afraid to call police due to, tension between the police and their community, which was notoriously pretty crime-ridden. Residents of the Hill district were very low income, many had criminal records, and many were unemployed. In fact, the media at the time referred to residents of the Hill district as, quote, unemployables. But, there was a reason for that wasn't entirely their fault. In the 1950s, in the decade before, the city of Pittsburgh had demolished hundreds of homes and businesses in the Hill District to make room for a sports arena and fancy new office buildings, which displaced many families who were forced to essentially start over from scratch. So we kind of have two problems brewing right now. We have this lack of proper ambulances and pre-hospital care leading to unnecessary deaths all over Pittsburgh and all over the United States, really. And we have this neighborhood full of low-income Black residents who are being called unemployable. These two problems are about to combine and conquer. The Maurice Falk Fund was this sum of money endowed by a guy named Maurice Falk in 1929. So Maurice Falk was a steel tycoon. He founded Weirton Steel Company in West Virginia. And so he had a lot of money, right? If you found a steel company, you have a lot of money. And he put $10 million into this Falk Fund that was meant to help people. The purpose of this fund was to help people. This is back when rich people actually did good things for the world. And so the Maurice Falk Fund, this $10 million, it was supposed to go towards grants in the fields of economics, politics, education, medicine, and social welfare. And the Falk Fund also happened to be headed at the time by a former ambulance driver named Phil Hallen. So Phil is like, I know how we could use some of this money. He's like, if we play our cards right, we can use it to improve emergency medical response, and we can create employment opportunities for residents of the Hill District, the ones they're calling unemployables in the media. And so this program gets funding from the Falk Fund and also from President Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty. Now, Dr. Safar finds out that Hallen is working to improve ambulance services in Pittsburgh. He's already super passionate about this after losing his daughter and witnessing the death of the former mayor/governor. So he reaches out to Hallen. He's like, I have some ideas, right? His ideas were basically training the ambulance staff as paramedics, teaching them how to actually save lives, and improving the design of the ambulance itself so that you could actually save a life in it. Which to me is honestly insane that it took until 1967 for us to figure this out. Hallen hears Dr. Safar out, and he's like, love it, makes so much sense. And he reaches out to Freedom House Enterprises to recruit these paramedics for the new ambulance service that they're dreaming up. So Freedom House Enterprises worked on civil rights projects. For some context, 1967, this is the year before Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Civil rights are a big deal still, this fight for equality. And so Freedom House Enterprises helped with voter registration, they organized NAACP meetings, and they offered job training and help finding jobs for Black people in Pittsburgh. So Hallen goes to Freedom House Enterprises and he's like, I need paramedics and your dudes need jobs. So let's team up. Let's do this. And the first Freedom House ambulance service recruited 25 Black men from the Hill District. These men had been unemployed for some time for various reasons. Around half of them had never graduated from high school. Some had criminal records, felonies that kept them from being able to get jobs. Quite a few were also veterans of the Vietnam War who likely suffered from lingering issues like PTSD, which resulted in drug and alcohol abuse. So this was a ragtag bunch, right? They were exactly who Hallen wanted, though. This is exactly what he was looking for. He recruits these guys to work as paramedics in this new ambulance service. Meanwhile, Dr. Safar designs this 32-week-long training program, because they're not just going to throw these guys from the hood in the back of an ambulance and be like, good luck, right? They're going to properly train them in a way that no one has ever really been trained before at this point. These guys are test subjects. They are the prototype of the modern-day EMT. So they start this 300-hour course designed by Dr. Safar where they learn anatomy and physiology, CPR, advanced first aid, nursing, and defensive driving, which is important for ambulance drivers, right? And the ones who never finished high school, they also complete their GEDs during this training. And while working on this, while developing this course, Dr. Safar meets Dr. Nancy Caroline, who at the time was just an ambitious med student working in the same hospital as him. She's intrigued by this concept, and she's determined to help Dr. Safar, and she eventually becomes Freedom House's first medical director. In that role, she took it even further. She trained the paramedics in intubation, cardiac care, and administering IVs. She literally wrote the book on paramedic training, which was adopted by the federal government in 1975. So the program, the Freedom House Ambulance Service program, began in 1967. And by 1968, after the guys were trained up, they went through this training program, it started operating with 2 ambulances in Pittsburgh. But before that, actually, before operating their own ambulances, they rode along with police officers in ambulances during the King assassination riots in 1968. So these were riots after the death of Martin Luther King. People were so upset over his death that they completely forgot everything he ever said or believed in and began rioting in the streets, using violence to try to combat inequality, which was not what he stood for at all. But they were angry. They were understandably angry, and this is what happened. And it was very violent, and it caused a lot of injuries that police were having to respond to. And honestly, the police officers were white, and they were afraid that they were going to be shot by these mostly black rioters, shot or attacked or whatever. So the Freedom House guys rode along with them to assist and to use their newly gained knowledge of emergency medicine and practice what they've learned, but also to serve as a sort of protection for the white police officers. They were much less likely to be attacked if they had black people with them during these very racially charged riots. Then the Freedom House guys got their own ambulances after that, and they started operating the downtown area as well as in predominantly black neighborhoods. So we have these 25 black guys from this impoverished neighborhood. Some are criminals, some are war veterans, half didn't finish high school. They've been trained up as paramedics and let loose on the city in these new and improved ambulances. So what happened? Well, it was a smashing success. They absolutely knocked it out of the park, these guys. It got to a point where callers would request Freedom House over the police. They'd be like, please send Freedom House, because they were that much better. According to data collected by Dr. Safar, the Freedom House guys responded to 5,800 calls, transported more than 4,600 predominantly black patients, and saved 200 lives in their first year alone. They had a response time of less than 10 minutes in most neighborhoods, which was way quicker than the police. And there was something else about the Freedom House guys, though, that made them more efficient in the role. They had relationships with the community. They had rapport with these people. Where there was all this friction between police and the black communities, that didn't exist with the Freedom House guys. The Freedom House guys came from the black communities, right? They were these people's neighbors. They were their friends. They were their family. According to Valerie Amato in the documentary The Forgotten Legacy of Freedom House, quote, Freedom House paramedics had compassion for the community. They told me, when you walk into a person's home, you're a guest. That's the number one thing they brought to the table. They cared. They addressed everybody by their names. They respected them and asked permission before providing treatment. End quote. They also understood the factors that kept people from calling for emergency services. They knew that a lot of these people were involved in illegal activity, and that by calling police to their homes, they were putting themselves at risk. For example, during a huge surge in heroin overdoses in the city, the Freedom House guys started contacting drug dealers and teaching them how to identify the signs of an overdose, what to do if someone is having an overdose. The police would have just arrested these guys. The Freedom House guys trained them to respond instead. And they also tell them that they won't get them in trouble. They'll provide medical assistance to anyone who needs it without any legal repercussions, without arrests for buying or selling drugs. And after that, there was a dramatic drop in heroin overdoses across the city. Imagine that. This is working so well, the Freedom House ambulance service, that it became the model for other similar ambulance services across the country. Everyone started copying what they were doing in Pittsburgh. They started training paramedics, and they started using Dr. Safar's ambulance design. His design was adopted by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration as the official ambulance design. But despite all this success, the Freedom House guys faced issues with racism all the time, from hospital staff, from the local government, and even from the patients themselves. Some patients refused to be touched or helped by them because they were Black. And I'm like, at that point, you're on your own, dude. Like, survival of the fittest, good luck with that. That's on you. There was a shift in government in Pittsburgh in 1970 that didn't help either, though. In 1970, Peter F. Flaherty became mayor of Pittsburgh. This guy. Flaherty was against the Freedom House ambulance service from the start. He claimed it was because he opposed public-private partnerships, right? Freedom House was this private program thing that was being contracted by the government, and he wasn't cool with that. He felt like the government should fully control and oversee all of the services that it used and not contract them out privately. Phil Hallen believed that racism played a part in Flaherty's dislike of the Freedom House guys too, though. And then there were some who believed that he was trying to get rid of Freedom House to pander to the police union. And Dr. Safar agreed. He believed that Flaherty was trying to get rid of Freedom House because of, quote, racial prejudices with white police officers eager to maintain control of ambulances citywide, end quote. And so it seems like it became this control thing. The city wants to control the ambulances. The white police officers want to control the ambulances. They're so desperate to be in control, it doesn't even matter that the Freedom House guys are doing a way better job than they ever did and saving lives left and right. It's all about control. So the way this all went down was that, because you guys knew this story wasn't going to have a happy ending, right? The way this all went down was that Freedom House eventually tried to expand their contract with the city to cover a larger area, and this was denied by the new mayor. They were hoping to start serving more affluent parts of the city where their ambulance fees might actually get paid. And then the city started paying them late, and then they cut their operating budget in half. So Flaherty is essentially strangling them financially. He also, get this stupidity, Flaherty also signed an ordinance banning the use of ambulance sirens downtown because of noise complaints. So now they can't turn on their sirens downtown to alert people to get out of the way, which slowed their response time down tremendously and allowed the white police officers to reach people first. He's literally gambling with people's lives over this need for control. In 1974, Flaherty announced that the city was going to start its own citywide, city-controlled ambulance service staffed by police officers who would be trained as paramedics. So he's essentially trying to completely replace the Freedom House guys here. They're not police officers, right? His new service is going to be staffed strictly by police officers. Now, Thankfully, this plan faced a lot of resistance from city council members, and ultimately Flaherty agreed to a compromise. He agreed to fund the Freedom House ambulance service for 1 more year, and then after that, it would switch to a citywide ambulance service, but the paramedics didn't have to be police officers. Okay, so this meant that, in theory, this meant that the Freedom House guys could keep working in the field, right? In theory. The Freedom House ambulance service officially closed in October of 1975, and this new citywide ambulance service starts up. And guess what? Every single paramedic hired to work it was white. Yeah, predictable, no? Don't get the guys who started this whole thing, who revolutionized it, who invented it. Just get some white guys to try to copy what they were doing. That'll be better. But then Dr. Nancy Caroline comes back on the scene. Remember her? She was the medical director for Freedom House, who literally wrote the book on emergency medical response. They want her, because she's white, they want her to come be the medical director for the new city ambulance service now. She agrees to do this only if they hire the Freedom House guys back and let them stay together and keep working together. So they honor part of this agreement. They hire the Freedom House guys, but their crews are broken up. They don't get to stay together. On top of that, they fire all of the ones with criminal records. They're immediately out. And then they make them take this pass-fail exam, but it had all this stuff on it that the Freedom House guys were never taught during their training. So in this way, they're sort of setting them up to fail, and many of them do fail the exam and are fired. Even the ones who do pass, most are reassigned to non-medical roles, and they're put in positions overseen by white employees with way less experience than them. And in the end, only 5 remained and continued to work for the city ambulance service, and only one of them was ever promoted to a leadership position. His name's John Moon. We're gonna hear from him soon. By the 90s, 98% of Pittsburgh's medical responders were white. This is how systemic racism works, you guys. It's not overt. It's not overt discrimination. It's not like, I'm not hiring you because you're black. No one says that. That's not what it looks like. That's not how it's done. It's casually, covertly placing obstacles in the way, twisting and manipulating and loopholing until it's just downright impossible for these guys to continue in the citywide ambulance service, right? But it's not our fault. He had a felony. He couldn't pass the test. He just wasn't cut out for it. And in this way, these guys were systematically kicked out of the roles that they had pioneered and forgotten. No thank you for changing emergency medical response forever. No thank you for saving all those lives. No good job defying incredible odds and succeeding in a critically important field that no one else seemed to get. Just, you can't pass the test I made up that I knew you couldn't pass? Goodbye. Not because they weren't good enough, but because white people wanted to be in control. And power was more important to them than saving lives. This is why we need to ensure diversity and inclusion, because systemic racism like this exists. It's built into the system. It has been for a long time. It still is. It has to be actively and consciously combated. It doesn't just go away because we pretend it doesn't exist. If you don't think it exists, it's because you're lucky. You're privileged enough to have never been on the receiving end of it. But we have to think about what's good for all. Flaherty, the mayor of Pittsburgh, he wasn't doing what was good for all. He was blinded by a need for power and control, as many politicians are, and he made decisions that probably cost people their lives. No ambulance sirens downtown? Give me a break, dude. I mentioned John Moon was the only Freedom House guy to ever reach any sort of leadership position within the city ambulance service. He eventually became assistant EMS chief in Pittsburgh until his retirement in 2009. And Moon said in an article for EMS One about the Freedom House ambulance service, quote, It was so far ahead of its time. It was inconceivable at that time for someone to come to your door and start an IV on you or intubate you and give you cardiac drugs and start CPR. Outside of the hospital, this had never been done. End quote. John Moon was actually the first person to ever perform an endotracheal intubation outside of a hospital in human history that we know of. He said of the systemic dismantling of Freedom House by the city, quote, "Despite a written agreement that our previous training would be accepted, it was not. As a result of constant belittling and additional needless class sessions, a great number of Freedom House personnel were systematically eliminated from employment with Pittsburgh EMS. When you eliminate the history makers, you essentially eliminate that part of history." End quote. Amen to that, John Moon. When you eliminate the history makers, you essentially eliminate that part of history. This is the reason why almost no one knows about the Freedom House ambulance service. Almost no one knows that our modern-day emergency medical response, our ambulances, our EMTs, our paramedics, how we respond to medical emergencies, how we save lives every single day came from a group of unemployed Black men scooped up off the streets in the hood. Like, what a remarkable story. And what a shame that these inspiring men, and eventually women too, never got the acknowledgement or the respect that they deserved. It really makes you think how this might have all been different if they had been white. If the Freedom House ambulance service employed white people instead of Black people, would we know about it today? Would we remember? Would we honor the work that they did to revolutionize pre-hospital care, to save countless lives in the decades since? Their work has likely saved the life of someone that you know. It might very well save your life someday. History has a way of forgetting the contributions of marginalized groups, of overwriting their stories in a way that diminishes their accomplishments. This is why we have Black History Month. This is why we have Women's History Month, Native American Heritage Month, Latin American Heritage Month, because without a conscious and intentional effort to include them, their stories get forgotten. They just do. That's unfortunately the way the system is designed. When you eliminate the history makers, you essentially eliminate that part of history. Well, we can't afford to eliminate any of our history. The good, the bad, the ugly, we carry it forward with us. It inspires, it informs, it warns. It reminds us of where we've already been so that we can clearly see where to go next. And where I want to go when facing a life-threatening emergency is to the hospital as quickly as possible. And thanks to the Freedom House ambulance service, I might just make it there alive. Thank you all so very much for listening to History Fix. I hope you found this story interesting and maybe you even learned something new. As always, source material for this episode can be found in the show notes. Be sure to follow my Instagram @HistoryFixPodcast to see some images that go along with this episode and to stay on top of new episodes as they drop. I'd also really appreciate it if you would rate and follow History Fix on whatever app you're using to listen and help me spread the word by telling a few friends about it. That'll make it much easier to get your next fix.